Welcome to the top 10 decks in the Pokemon TCG standard format for December 2023. I'll be using the LimitlessTCG.com points ranking today for our top 10 decks, starting with number 10. But before we do that, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more Pokemon TCG content if you enjoyed today's video. If you'd like to support my channel, you can do so by using code CELIO5 at PokeCollect.com for a wide selection of sealed products, pre-orders for new releases, and unique mystery box items. Use code CELIO at PoTownStore.com when shopping for Pokemon TCG Live code cards, and use my codes and affiliate links at Dragon Shield Sleeves and Into the AM Apparel. Also, if you are looking to sell your Pokemon TCG bulk cards that are taking up space that you could get money for, find a buyer today at TCGBulk.com. Starting with number 10, LimitlessTCG.com has ranked Lugia Archeops for our current standard format. Lugia Archeops got a solid amount of Day 2 placements at the LAIC tournament in November, but the highest placement was 80th place. So although there were 7 players that made it into Day 2, they didn't convert very well in Day 2. The most popular and most successful variant of Lugia V-Star Archeops in the current standard format has been the colorless Lugia variant, although the colorless Lugia variant has a little more color now with the help of Earthen Vessel to search out specific basic energy types. So since Primal Turbo can't attach basic energies, Earthen Vessel is here to help you find your basic energy cards. This is the 80th place list, playing a Fire Energy for Radiant Charizard and a Water Energy for Lumineon V. But you can also certainly add in a Lightning Energy instead of that Water, and then make another cut like the Snorlax or the Mew or the Drapion, or a supporter card like Clara to add in Iron Hands EX along with that Lightning Energy. Lugia has fallen off, partially because its good matchups like Giratina and Lost Zone box decks aren't as much of a meta share in the current standard format, but there's also matchups that you don't want to face, like Charizard and Miraidon. You can make the Miraidon matchup a little bit better by adding in Dunsparce, which you do see here in this deck list, and Miraidon just won the LAIC event, and it's a really strong deck in the current standard format, so I wouldn't play Lugia without the Dunsparce going into any upcoming events. Next at number 9 is Entei V Iron Valiant, which hasn't had a ton of success thus far, but it did get second place piloted by Noah Sawyer at LAIC, which is really boosting it up in the rankings. One note about Noah Sawyer's Entei Iron Valiant deck is that Technical Machine De-Evolution can probably just be cut for a tech against Mew VMAX like Spirit Tomb, which can go a long way because Mew VMAX is a tough matchup, but if you can get a Spirit Tomb down turn 1, that can really stifle their ability to get into the game and actually give you a real fighting chance in that matchup. Entei Iron Valiant was definitely good for LAIC because it had surprise factor on its side and the factor of nobody practicing the matchup. But now it's a little bit more of a known quantity, and I think it'll settle as just roughly a solid tier 2 deck. So number 9 in the points ranking makes sense to me. But if we weren't using the points ranking, I might have put something like Roaring Moon into the top 10 over Entei Iron Valiant. Next in the points, tied for number 7 or number 8, is Snorlax Stall. And Snorlax Stall had a pretty okay time at LAIC with 4 placements into Day 2, the highest being Kito Arai placing into the top 8 with Snorlax Stall. But then the following week we had Lucas win the Gdansk Regionals with Snorlax Stall, and then also the same 60 pair of Samantha and James get 6th and 7th at the Brisbane Regionals that same weekend with Snorlax Stall. So we'll look at the first place list from Gdansk piloted by Lucas because I think this will be the deck list you're most likely to come up against if you do face Stall in an upcoming event. So this is definitely a deck to be aware of. Not every deck needs to tech for it. Not every deck should tech for it. If you have a deck like Charizard, which we'll cover later in the rankings, spoiler alert, just putting one card in isn't really going to beat Stall a lot of times. The Minior is not going to always beat Stall decks, especially if they have precautionary text for the Minior, like an extra Mimikyu, or I believe a Mawile can also be helpful, although the Mawile does need to be paired with an energy card to attack with. So just be careful when you're teching for Snorlax stall that your techs actually do beat the matchup. And also think about, do I really need to beat Snorlax stall to achieve my goal for this event? If your goal is to make day 2, then you would need to hit 3 Snorlax stalls if they're auto losses to be knocked out of day 2 contention because of this deck, right? If your goal is to win the event and you think that a Snorlax stall can make top 8, then you would definitely need a tech for it. If that's your expectations and your only goal is winning the event, then you can't take a loss in top 8 or later on to an auto loss like Snorlax. So definitely evaluating your goals and if the techs actually help your deck against Snorlax stall are 2 things to think about, because it's also perfectly fine to just accept the loss like we'll see many decks do. Notably, Robin Schultz, former world champion, played Charizard Pidgeot and got top 4 at the Gdansk Regionals and played 0 outs to Snorlax stall, scooped and got a top 4. Not too bad of a tournament performance. Also tied for that 7th or 8th spot in the rankings is Miraidon EX. So Miraidon EX Flaffy had 7 placements at the LAIC, and then it had 1 placement at the Philippines Regional League that same weekend, but then did not do very well the following weekend at Brisbane and Gdansk. Now the reason for that is going to be because it did so well at LAIC. People switched to Charizard, and people specifically switched to Charizard Pidgeot, which is actually a more manageable version of Charizard for Miraidon to beat. But Charizard Pidgeot is better against Gardevoir, which also did very well at LAIC, which is why we saw that variant of the deck come out. There's 2 main lists for Miraidon that I would be looking at. The first, of course, is the first place deck list from LAIC, playing Iron Hands, playing 13 Lightning Energy, and playing double Turbo Energy. Also note switching to that Zeraora for free retreat instead of the Flying Pikachu V for a couple of reasons. So the Flying Pikachu V was better because there was a lot of Lost Zone box in the format previously, so if you wanted a free retreater, Flying Pikachu V was better because it wasn't a single prize that could be Lost Mined. But now Zeraora is better because Lost Zone is less popular, so Zeraora is less of a liability, and Battle Claw is actually a usable attack against things like Charizard and against things like Gardevoir. So against Gardevoir, you can actually take a knockout against their attackers. Against Charizard, you can soften something up. A 30 poke can soften up a lot of different Pokemon out there in the field. It could even finish off a Roaring Moon EX after it uses Frenzied Gouging if it doesn't have an Ancient Capsule on it. And then the other Miraidon Flaffy list I want to look at is Anil's 13th place list. This one played 18 Lightning Energy and no Path to the Peak. It just played Beach Courts as a stadium card. But I do think that Path to the Peak is just an extremely valuable card in the standard format right now. It's good against Miraidon, it's good against Charizard, it's good against Roaring Moon, it's good against Gardevoir. It's hard to not play Path to the Peak in a deck that can easily fit it in. So while I do like Anil's list for the high amount of energy, so you have much better odds with Electric Generator, I also don't think that the double Iron Hands is explicitly needed in the deck for the matchups that are around, and I think I'd rather have the Path to the Peaks, and maybe even considering adding a 3rd Path to the Peak to Yuho's first place list. Next at number 6, we have Chien-Pao-Bax's Caliber. Chien-Pao-Bax's Caliber had an insane amount of placements. More than a dozen people made it into day 2 with this at LAIC. Although the highest placement was top 16 by Ian and Rob, and then nobody even got top 32 with the deck after that. It was the placements were 14th to 38th. There was nothing in between. And we see a lot of really good players at the top here with it. Just the top 4 in a row. We got Ian, Rob, Grant Shen, Caleb Gettimer, Grant Manley, and the best placement they could scrape away with this deck was 14th, which is still really good at an LAIC, but in my opinion, if a deck has, what is this, like 14 placements into day 2, and you have some incredible players, also Jared Grimes, who's been playing the deck a ton, I would imagine if the deck was that good, it would have gotten into top 8 with all these top level players piloting the deck in day 2, and just so many instances of the deck in day 2. I am not a Chi and Pal believer. I actually don't think it's as good as the points are ranking it for today's video. But it was heavily played, and a lot of good players played it, and you can see how many placements it got in day 2. So the LAIC results for this deck are definitely bumping up its ranking for today. And let's take a look at Ian Rob's list, which I think is the way to play the deck. Just one Lightning Energy, because you don't need Iron Hands in every game, and you're only going to prize your 1 of Lightning Energy 1 out of 10 games, so it's not a big deal if you do prize it, because the deck was fine before Iron Hands. I definitely think you should be keeping cross switchers. I saw too many people cutting cross switchers from the deck, and I think that's just an integral part of how the deck functions, especially with Pokestops. You can't really play boss, and then if you play counter catchers, you're only getting a gust effect when you're falling behind, and this can be a very aggressive deck sometimes. So I definitely think Ian Rob's deck list ends up being the best one for Chi and Pal Excalibur, but it's not a deck that I would play or suggest anyone to play if you're not already the most comfortable with that deck. Something else we could take a break here to just mention is that you shouldn't switch off of the only deck you're comfortable with and know your matchups for a deck that I or somebody else says is better. The pool of decks you're selecting from for a major event should always be including only decks that you understand the matchups for. If you can't conceptualize your matchups and understand what your ideal turn 1s and turn 2s, what your techs are for, what your bad matchups are, the way things need to go or not to go to win a matchup, then you probably shouldn't be playing that deck, and you should play a deck that you understand. Now, moving on to Lost Zone Box, ranked at number 5, there are multiple versions of Lost Zone Box. We can start with this Mirage Gate Sablezard build that Brennan got 5th at LAIC with. So this includes Dark Energy for the Roaring Moon EX. It has Jirachi in there to be a tech against other Lost Zone decks, and also a tech against Yoga Loop, although it doesn't protect the active, so Yoga Loop can still work if they can use it on your active Pokemon. Lost Zone is in a little bit of a weird spot with the release of Jirachi, with Stage 2 decks becoming more stable, with more big basics around, and especially with Iron Hands EX here to take multiple prizes against most of your Pokemon. Although Lost Zone did get its own buffs with Counter Catcher, which you'll see included as a 2 count in this deck. Then we also have Tord Reklev's recent 5th place list from the Gdansk Regionals, which is kind of a crazy deck list. It's using Roaring Moon EX, Iron Hands EX, and also a 1/1 line of Palkia V-Star with also Kyogre. Just really having a very wide scope of options throughout the game, which is something that a player like Tord Reklev can take advantage of and make very good use of, because he's a very good player with a lot of experience and a lot of experience making those macro decisions and micro decisions and all these really hard decisions that Lost Zone decks need, especially when you're only playing one of all of your Pokemon except for Comfey. So this isn't a deck that I would widely suggest outward to just anyone watching this video. You know, if you're taking the deck to a League Challenge or a League Cup, or you're playing it online, then absolutely go for it and play whatever you want. But if you're looking for a suggestion for an upcoming regional like Stuttgart or San Antonio, and you've never touched a Lost Zone deck, then I would probably stray away from picking up a Lost Zone deck this close to your next major event. And of course, we also have some recent success from just the straight up turbo Lost Zone builds with really minimal to no changes from the previous format without Paradox Rift. This is from the Philippines Regional League, a 2nd place turbo Lost Zone deck with really no changes, like I said, from last format to now. And next at number 4, we have Mew VMAX, but this does combine DTE Mew VMAX and also Fusion Mew VMAX. We'll start with this 4th place list from regionals, from the Brisbane Regionals, Fusion Strike Mew VMAX. Of course, this is going to give you a single prize attacking option, so you're not just forced into Mew VMAX and then Mew VMAX. This is helpful against decks like Charizard and Roaring Moon, which have comfortable one-shots against Mew VMAX no matter what you do. And this is also playing 3 grabbers to try to disrupt the Charizard deck as best as possible. This helps especially against the Charizard Pidgeot version if you're able to go Judge Path Grabber, which this deck isn't necessarily built to do because it does have the Alessa's Sparkle, but it is provided as an option for this build of the deck. Then if we go and look at something like the 8th place deck list from the Gdansk regionals, we'll see that this one is much more focused on using that Judge Grabber Path combo against Charizard decks. Because they're not playing the Fusion Strike energy, they're not playing the Alessa Sparkle, and they're not playing the Meloetta and the Ice Cube. So that's a big buff to this version of the deck compared to the Fusion Strike, although the Fusion Strike can get aggressive early attacks, and they have single prize attackers. So that decision is, do you want more disruption with the extra Judge and the extra Path, the vacuums, even something like Avery that can be good against the mirror match to make them discard bench Pokemon. It can be good against Guardy and also Chi and Pal to lower their bench size, because then you escape rope and make them send up something they don't want to lose. I personally prefer the DTE version of Mew VMAX right now, just because I like that Judge Path combo, also the Avery. And like I said, I think that Path is just a very, very strong card right now. I should also mention that there is the Excelgor version of Mew VMAX. This was piloted by Reagan Retzloff to a 45th place finish at LAIC. The Excelgor is used for its Ninja Tornado attack, which is good against Roaring Moon and also good against Charizard. So depending on how much you respect those matchups, maybe you could consider this version of the deck as well. But the DTE Grabber version of Mew also has a fine time against Charizard. It's just a little more combo oriented and a little more volatile about, can you get those combos on the first or second turn of the game to really disrupt them hard enough to then be able to run through their board before they establish multiple Charizards and find the stadium bumps. Whereas the Excelgor version can actually just knock out Charizards and Moons with the help of Power Tablet. At number 3, we have Lost Zone Giratina V-Star, which had a ton of placements at LAIC, and it also converted into a 4th place finish, a top 16 finish, and 2 top 32 finishes. I want to look here at Grant Hayes' top 32 deck list. Grant Hayes also wrote a free article on Ian Robb's Substack. You can find that on Ian Robb's Twitter. I definitely suggest subscribing to that Substack, whether it's free or the paid version. But like I said, Grant wrote a free summation of his experience with Giratina at LAIC on Ian's Substack. So definitely go check that out over on Ian Robb's Twitter. Giratina V-Star is strong for a lot of reasons. Number 1, it has a diversity of single prize attackers and double prize attackers. It has one-hit knockout potential with Giratina V-Star. It has the early turn consistency with a Beast Seeking. It has Moonlight Shuriken that can take multiple knockouts. It has Sableye Lost Mine that can spread damage counters around. It's a very, very overall solid deck, and then it even has Disruption plus Path to the Peak, which I can't stress enough how good Path to the Peak is, in my opinion, in this current format, especially with top players switching back to Charizard Pidgeot instead of Charizard Bibarel. The Charizard Pidgeot version of the deck is much weaker to Path to the Peak compared to the Bibarel version. So I think Lost Zone Giratina V-Star is never a bad play, and it's never a great play. It's somewhere in the middle because your matchups are neither poor nor great. Your matchups are most of the time somewhere in the middle there, and you have to play a solid game, get a little lucky along the way, and maybe if you hit a few more decks that are weak to Path to the Peak, you can have a little bit of an easier day with the deck, as long as you can get that disruption going, followed by aggressive attacking to actually close out the game. Number 2 is going to be Charizard EX. We're going to focus on this Charizard Pidgeot build for today. Robin Schultz's list from Gdansk, he got top 4. I think this list is darn near perfect. I like the Rotom V for a more stable turn 1. I like the triple Lost City plus Avery. It makes the matchup miserable for Gardevoir, especially because you're playing the Pidgeot version. You can search for that Lost City or the Avery or the boss, whatever it is that's going to hurt the Gardevoir player more. You can just be very, very aggressive. This deck list is all about aggression, whereas the Bibarel version is a little bit more about reliability and consistency and playing a smooth game. This is about pure aggression, in my opinion, and you also get a little bit more of that consistency and reliability with the Rotom V, adding in a second Forest Stone target, but also a good Pokemon for turn 1 that can just draw you 3 cards. And if they knock out a liability like Rotom V or Lumineon, you often don't mind too much, because that's a boss's orders they're not going to be using on your Pidgeot later, and they're also charging up your Charizard EX's Burning Darkness attack, making you do more damage now that they knocked out double prizers. And also something very important to remember when you're playing a Charizard deck is if your opponent is on even prizes and you need to get them to odd prizing, don't be afraid to find a way to take a knockout with a Charmander or Charmeleon, because oftentimes those situations will arise and you can knock something out with like an Ember or a Heat Tackle. That's why players are playing a very specific spread of Charmanders and Charmeleon. And finally, number 1 right now is Gardevoir EX. I have a very long video with tons of gameplay and analysis about Gardevoir EX on the channel from when I played it in 2 online events recently. I got a top 4 and a first place. So definitely check out that video if you want more Gardevoir EX analysis and to watch a ton of analyzed Gardevoir EX gameplay as well. My favorite Gardevoir EX deck list right now is Kieran Farah's 3rd place at LAIC. I've made just small adjustments to the deck list. I have replaced the Nest Ball with a 4th Fog Crystal, and you can definitely replace the Research with a 4th Iono if you want, but I know Kieran said that he got plenty of value out of the Professor's Research over his LAIC run. The reasoning for Lumineon V over 2nd Avery is that you can, first of all, you're playing 4 Ultra Ball in this list, which I really like, and that you can Ultra Ball for the Lumineon to get that Avery on the turn it's needed. Whereas playing a 2nd Avery or even just the 1 Avery, you can't consistently have that Avery when you need it. Against the mirror match and against Chi and Pal, Avery is very impactful, even against Mew, to make them discard a couple of Genesects or a Genesect and a Mew. You want to find that supporter card on specific turns often, and then even in matchups where the Avery isn't good, you're happy that you don't have 2 or 3 Averys clogging up your deck that you don't want to see, and you can then use that Lumineon to find other supporters that do matter, like Boss's Orders or Iono or Professor Toro scenario. And speaking of Professor Toro, you have Toro and Collapse Stadium to get rid of the Lumineon V if you really need to. The other thing about Kieran's list is that he's playing Zacian V instead of the Luxurious Cape to combine with Screamtail and Gardevoir. The reason to play Zacian V is because it's a 1 card. You only need to find that Zacian V late in the game to take that final KO. You can Fog Crystal for it, you can Ultra Ball for it. You can also Super Ride it back into your deck, and you only need the Zacian V. Whereas you can't recycle the Luxurious Cape, and you can't search out the Luxurious Cape. So Luxurious Cape's really strong. It's a really strong swing card that you can attach to Gardevoir or Screamtail, but Zacian V is always going to be lower maintenance to use. And also another thing about the Luxurious Cape is that it has become much more risky to use anytime but the very last turn of the game, because Lost Vacuum is becoming more popular in the meta, and then it can just be Lost Vacuumed off and you lose a prize card there, and then they knock something else out and you lose. So Zacian V just seems like the smarter card inclusion right now for Gardevoir EX, but Luxurious Cape also definitely has its benefits that Zacian V just cannot do. So those are the top 10 decks for December 2023. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. You can find all the deck lists and data I was looking through on this video at limitlesstcg.com, and make sure you subscribe here for more Pokemon TCG content. If you're interested in leveling up your game, I offer free and paid articles as well as one-on-one coaching over on metafy.com, so definitely check out those links down below if you're interested in becoming the best possible player that you can be. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.